are going to start off the show today with the second half of the Hard-Headed Sports mock draft for the 2021 NFL Draft. We covered picks 1 through 16 on Saturday. We are going to cover picks 17 through 32 today, picking up right where we left off, accounting for trades and everything that happened with the first half of the mock draft. So if you're interested in figuring out which teams I think are going to take which players in picks 1 through 16, you should go watch that video. I'll post a little card that should be right up here, and I'm sorry for those of you on Spotify that are like, hey, this is audio, I don't see what you're pointing at. It's right here, ladies and gentlemen, top right hand corner of your screen. Just think about it, click it, interact with it, you know what to do. Picks 17 through 32, again accounting for trades. I wanted to make sure that I took some extra time to make sure that I feel confident about these picks because, as I said on Saturday, I feel like this draft is volatile. I think that a lot is going to happen. I think anything can happen. It's not as chalk as everybody thinks it is. There are a bunch of ways that teams can go this season or go in this draft. So let's just go ahead and get into it, picking up with the Raiders at number 17, who are going to take Alex Leatherwood, tackle from Alabama. Look, I was going to project a defensive end or defensive tackle to go to the Raiders in this spot before the Raiders completely blew up their offensive line. They lost 3 out of the 5 starters. They traded Trent Brown, they traded Gabe Jackson, and they let go of another, can't quite remember who that was. 3 out of the 5 starters for the Las Vegas Raiders last season on the offensive line are gone. The Raiders are going to have to. I would imagine that they take a tackle or a guard in the first round of the draft. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure what they're doing. Again, I probably would have projected a defensive end or defensive tackle to go to the Raiders in this spot before they completely destroy their offensive line. But if they don't go for an offensive lineman in the first round to try and rebuild that offensive line, then I have no idea what John Gruden is doing over there and Mayock is doing over there in Las Vegas. Going on to the Dolphins at number 18, who are going to take Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I have liked this kid for a long time. I have been saying that the Dolphins should probably draft this kid if he's available. Look, linebacker out of Notre Dame, he's extremely quick. He's versatile. He goes left to right. He goes all over the field with extreme ease. He could be very good in protection as well. Not pass protection, pass defense, excuse me. And the real kicker here is that the Dolphins' worst group on defense last year was the linebacking core, and that was before they moved on from Kyle Van Noy. The Dolphins had an extremely good defense, number 1 in takeaways, I think number 1 in points allowed too, if I'm remembering correctly. They had an extremely good defense, a Super Bowl caliber defense, and that worst spot on that defense was the linebacker core. And since they moved on from Kyle Van Noy, it only makes sense that they take a linebacker with their second pick in the first round of the NFL draft. I think that Owusu-Koramoah is going to be available at the slot. I think Parsons is going early in the draft, as I said on Saturday. There are some other linebackers available, but I think Owusu-Koramoah is more of what the Dolphins are looking for with this specific pick. Now, the Washington football team at number 19 will be taking Mack Jones, quarterback from Alabama. A lot of people may be controversial on this pick. I think that even with the loaded quarterback room that Washington has at the moment, consisting of Fitzpatrick, Allen, and Heineke, I think that the Washington football team are still looking for that quarterback of the future. Now, whether that's Heineke, whether that's Allen, I think Allen is probably the odd man out in the situation. I think they're more than likely looking for a quarterback that they can sit for a while until he matures. And even though Mack Jones is probably the most mature quarterback in terms of age, he only did play 1 season at Alabama, and he was surrounded with a load of talent. I would be very interested to see another kind of Miami Dolphins situation with the Washington football team in which Ryan Fitzpatrick was able to mentor another young quarterback. That's kind of who he is at this point in the career. And I think Mack Jones would be welcomed, and I think it would be a good landing spot for him in Washington. And I'm thinking that if he's not taken at this point, which in my mock he isn't taken at this point, Washington would be a good selection for Mack Jones and vice versa. Moving on to the Patriots at number 20. Now, if you're wondering why the Patriots at 20, that's because in the first half of the mock draft, I had them trading with the Bears. The Bears traded up to get Trey Lance. The Patriots traded down to 20. And with the 20th selection in the draft, the Patriots will take Kwity Paye, defensive end out of Michigan. Can you remember the last time that the Bears had a dominant pass rusher? That the Patriots had a dominant pass rusher? I think Richard Seymour, Chandler Jones, those are the names that come to mind. So the Patriots really don't have a solidified pass rush. They don't have that scary edge rusher that Kwity Paye is. They don't have that type of rusher, and I think Kwity Paye will fill that role tremendously. and help a defense that was good last year. Is going to be returning a lot of veteran players, but could really use some youth on the defensive line. I really am excited about that selection, actually. Kwity Paye going to the Patriots at number 20 after the Patriots trade down with the Chicago Bears. Moving on to the Colts at number 21, they will select Jalen Phillips, defensive end, Miami. Now, a lot of people are debating on whether Gregory Rousseau or Jalen Phillips is going to be the best defensive end prospect coming out of Miami. I think Jalen Phillips is better than Gregory Rousseau, and the Colts have lost not only Denico Autry, I think his name is, but they also lost Justin Houston on the defensive end, or the defensive line. They're going to need a strong 3-4 defensive end to make up for that. I would imagine that they go defensive end in the first round, and they will take Jalen Phillips, defensive end, out of Miami. Moving on to the Titans at number 22, they will select Rondale Moore, wide receiver from Purdue. The Titans lost Corey Davis and Adam Humphries in the offseason. And the wide receiver core in Tennessee wasn't really that fantastic to begin with. They do have some other players available there, but I think that they are going to need weapons. Look, Derrick Henry cannot carry that offense forever. Ryan Tannehill is going to need some other weapons to throw to, and Rondale Moore, even though he only played 3 games last season with Purdue because of the Big Ten opting in, opting out, re-opting in, that ginormous situation, he showed a lot in that game. I think he 3 touchdowns, 270 yards in those 3 games. So he's a fantastic prospect. I imagine he's got elite speed. He's got really good separation. And I think the Titans should take a chance on Rondale Moore. The Jets at number 23 with their second selection in the first round of the 2021 NFL Draft will take Wyatt Davis, guard out of Ohio State University. I think Wyatt Davis is probably a second-round prospect, but I don't think the Jets are good drafters, so they'll probably take a guard at the selection. And I think that Wyatt Davis at this point is probably the best guard available, at least in my mock draft. Obviously, Rashawn Slater went early, and a lot of the other top offensive line prospects are tackles. So Wyatt Davis moving up, or probably rising up in the stock of the draft to be taken by the Jets at number 23, who do have a pretty porous offensive line apart from Mekhi Becton on the left side. You put Wyatt Davis, another young player, on that side as well. You're going to have a young line, but you're going to have more or less a pretty efficient line, at least one side of the quarterback. The other side is going to need a lot of work, but I think that whichever quarterback the Jets take with a number 2 overall pick, they're going to need to protect him. I think Wyatt Davis is probably your best bet at guard in that situation. Moving on to the Steelers at 24, who are going to take Najee Harris, running back out of Alabama. Remember when the Steelers had an efficient running game? Probably James Conner a couple years ago was the most efficient that running game has ever been. And I would argue, and I think a lot of people would argue, that the lack of a running game is what kind of doomed the offense for the Steelers last season, considering that Big Ben is getting older. Juju Smith-Schuster wasn't getting open as much. They need a running game, and they need a big, heavy, power-dominant running back. And Najee Harris, I think, would be perfect in that role. Reignite the toughness and the grittiness that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. No more of the funny business, no more of the TikToks, no more of the egotistical issues. Pittsburgh Steelers need to go back to being a dominant, scary football team, a team that is going to run you over, and I see a lot of Jerome Bettis and Najee Harris, and I think that would be a really welcomed addition to the Steelers football team, taking Najee Harris at number 24. Moving on a little bit faster now, I'm talking way too much. Jaguars at 25 are going to take Christian Barmore, defensive tackle, Alabama. A couple of Alabama guys going back-to-back. I've liked Christian Barmore to the Jaguars for a while now. The Jaguars have an awful defensive line. Christian Barmore is going to be a huge presence at defensive tackle to plug up the running game, which was a huge downer. Really, just the entire defense for Jacksonville was bad last year, but I think Barmore is going to do a good job at plugging the gap. He can rush the passer as well at defensive tackle. I think that's a surefire pick at 25 if Barmore is still available. The Browns at 26 are going to take Zaven Collins, linebacker out of Tulsa, and I've said this on the show multiple times before. If there's one thing that the Browns showed me last year, and one thing that stuck out to me, it was the divisional round against the Chiefs, in which the Browns looked completely outmatched at linebacker. The linebackers weren't fast enough to compete with Kansas City's receivers, and if those teams are going to meet again, which more likely they will, Cleveland is going to need some faster linebackers. Zaven Collins is lightning quick. He can play top to bottom all over the place, kind of like Caruso Amora, or Wusu Karamoa, that I projected going to the Dolphins earlier. Similar type of player. He's got much better upside, I think, in terms of what he can potentially be. He's got a higher ceiling, but he's got to do, a lot more to reach it. Browns take linebacker Zayvon Collins at number 26. Ravens at 27 take Jason Owa, edge rusher from Penn State, defensive end, or Kadarius Toney, wide receiver from Florida. I know that it's a mock draft and I got to make a decision here, but I really can't decide what the Ravens are going to do here. I think they'll probably elect for Owa out of Penn State. They lost Judon and a name that I'm actually forgetting at the moment. They lost multiple edge rushers on the defense from last season. And even though the Ravens desperately need wide receiver help, you can get that in day 2 and day 3. They'll probably elect for Owa, who is going to be a bit of a, how do I say this, a prospect, a raw prospect. He's going to need a little bit of work, but the upside is there. I think they'll take Jason Owa. Saints at 28 are going to take Trayvon Moehrig, safety out of TCU, the first safety taken off the board. There's not really a strong safety class this year in the NFL draft, and the Saints need some safety help. Look, they re-signed Marcus Williams. He is not going to be there forever, though. I believe they tagged Marcus Williams, so he could leave potentially. And he needs help. He needs help on the backside of the defense. So I think taking a safety there is probably the smart decision. A lot of mocks actually have Moehrig going there, and I completely agree. I think that would be the smart play for the Saints. I'd be surprised if they take anybody else. The Packers at 29 going to take Rashad Bateman, wide receiver out of Minnesota. And I know it was painfully obvious that the Packers should have taken a wide receiver last draft in the first round, and I would be really incensed if they don't take a wide receiver in the first round of this draft as well. They have multiple free agents on the wide receiver core coming up in subsequent seasons. They're going to need a good number 2 weapon. Bateman is tall, he's fast, he would be a good number 2 to Devontae Adams. They need to take a wide receiver. I think they'll take Bateman out of Minnesota, and he's going to be closer to home, so to speak. He can play in the cold. Bills at 30 are going to take Jarman Davis, I think it is. I might have a misspelling there in my notes. Linebacker for Kentucky. Somebody that's really come on in the late draft process. Leading up to the draft, he's really come on. The Bills linebacker core was not so good. They re-signed Matt Milano. Tremont Edmonds had a very down year. They're probably going to look to move on from him soon. They're going to need another explosive linebacker on that core next to Matt Milano. So Matt Milano was basically carrying the load for the Bills linebacker core last season. I think they take linebacker Jarman Davis from Kentucky to try and fill that gap even more. The Chiefs at 31 take Jackson Carman, guard, Clemson. We all know what the Chiefs' problem was in the Super Bowl, and granted, they did a lot to address that. In free agency, they got multiple offensive linemen, but some of them on one-year deals. And even though there is a long-term investment in Joe Thuney, you're going to need another guard there on the other side to really help him move, really change that offensive line. I think Jackson Carman out of Clemson is another decent guard prospect. He's got some character issues, but I think the Chiefs will be wise to take another offensive lineman to really make sure that Mahomes gets the protection he deserves. And then finally, the Buccaneers at 32 are going to take Gregory Rousseau, defensive end out of Miami. The Buccaneers returned pretty much all 22 starters from last season. There is room to grow on the defensive line. That part of the team is getting old. Pierre-Paul is getting old. Barrett is getting older. You need some youth on the defensive line. And Rousseau, who's potentially one of the best defensive end prospects in the draft, he did not play. He opted out last season, so it could be a bit of a gamble here, and I think that the Buccaneers could get one of the best prospects in the draft if he falls to them because he didn't play last season, but I would wager that's probably the best move for a team that retained all 22 starters, and that's, again, absolutely obscene. That's very rare, and I think that's the first time it's ever happened in the Super Bowl era that a team that won the Super Bowl retained all 22 starters. You could still see some youth on the defensive end or the defensive line, and if Rousseau proves to be more of a bust and a one-year wonder than a true top prospect, hey, the Buccaneers are already winning Super Bowls. They're in win-now mode anyway. I think that's the way that they should go. And that is the first round of the NFL draft. That is my mock draft. That is the Hard-Headed Sports mock draft picks 1 through 32. I'm going to have the entire list up on your screen right over here. And you can see all the picks there. Thank you so much for watching this video. What do you think of this mock draft? How does it compare to yours? Let me know. Did I make any mistakes? Do you have people going higher? Do you have people going lower? It's almost draft time, ladies and gentlemen. 9 days away. We're almost getting there. It's going to be very interesting to see how volatile this draft truly can be. Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to this segment from the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this segment, make sure that you drop a like on the video and a comment. It helps me out a bunch. And if you're interested in watching more segments like this from the show after the show has been completed, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. My name is Nick Ryan, and I will see you all again very soon.